Hi everyone, Mature Simmer here. So I'm back on for a little bit here at Lomeric's farm next day. So as you can well see, at this point it looks like he's just kind of leaving the plowing to me, which is all perfectly fine. Lets me kind of work through things at my leisure when I can. So I can kind of get on, do some work. I suppose it helps if I lower the plow. That helps me actually do more effective work. Thought I had it down, but obviously I had not. So I've got a tiny bit of time here. Tiny is a relative term. It's, therefore FS, the time suck of gaming that it is. I know I referred to, I think a couple episodes ago, the fact that I'm approaching the same amount of time and getting ready to exceed at some point the time I spent in FS19 here in FS22. Now, I was thinking on that the other day though, and I do think I have spent less time in FS22, where initially I think there was a lot of activity in FS19, but of course I do have to caveat that in that as I learned courseplay and got familiar with that, I definitely know in FS19 I was doing a lot of things in single player, just kind of enjoying the game, letting it do its thing with courseplay on really large maps like Wild West. And so there were times I would let the game run overnight and let it kind of harvest a field and so forth, as I had figured out how to fully automate that, where things were going to silos. And sometimes that worked and sometimes that didn't. But, there's large blocks of time then that come in where, maybe it had been running for 14 hours fully automated or something. That's obviously in that play time, and it was time that the computer was doing things, but I didn't come to FS19 right at the beginning of FS19. I think I was probably at that middle point. Maybe it was the year it had been out a year or something, but I was not there at release time. So those 2100 hours over in FS19 were done in a compressed time frame. So it might be similar. It might have been, I might have had a couple years, and we're kind of just coming up on a couple years here. As we hit November of this year, will be 2 years since the release of Farming Simulator 22. So but I'm pretty sure, well, I'm almost guaranteed I will have exceeded that time, so it's not necessarily apples to apples in the comparison, is really kind of what I wanted to be clear about and transparent about. But I've got a few things I can potentially get done today, but unfortunately it's one of those realities where real life is got things for me to do, which is fine. I can't live my life in Farming Simulator, although some days I feel like that, and certainly today is one of them, where I would enjoy just kind of shutting off the world and just burying my head in here and spending another one of those 8 or 10 hour days doing stuff like plowing this field or whatever, but alas, it is not to be. So what I am going to do here at this point, since it's clear that I'm going to have likely the opportunity to get this done, and we have all the way through April, but I don't think it's going to take me anywhere near that amount of time. My guess is in the next couple days, so before winter is done, this should all be plowed up and so forth. But what I was trying to be cognizant of and being respectful of is, I know if he decided to run these via AI, I don't know, although I guess now that I think about it as I'm sitting here thinking out loud, there was a time when I was on Schwag's farm at one point where he was running the AI harvesters, and I was wondering, hey, are they going to know that I took care of this part of the field, and I had gone ahead and cut a couple headland lines along the edge of the map, and they did then visibly stop earlier, so maybe it would have worked. But my concern initially, and why I didn't start and do what I'm doing now the night that I knew I had at best a few minutes, and instead I'm like, you know what, I'll just park by the field, and then if I come in again and he's gone ahead and had the AI do something, I'll pick up from there. But I was worried, like, hey, if I did, say, these headlands all the way around, which is what I did last time that worked, I felt pretty well, which is why I'm going to do it again, that it would cost him more money to run the AI because it might not realize, hey, I've done portions of the fields. So it kind of was one of those, well, if I did a good amount of 11, say, and then did a run around on all the rest, that doesn't necessarily work out exactly as one would like. But at this point, it's looking like, because this is the third, fourth day, I think, that I've been kind of left to my own devices here, at least with the work that he had assigned me and said, hey, this is on your work list. You know, it's just he did say time permitted on these. I knew it couldn't last. I knew the lag would get me somewhere. And it's like the worst place, because I was going to use this to set my line, and I don't know that I can. I don't know that I'm going to have 15 meters, especially if it keeps doing this. Because what I want to do then is at the bottom of the field, last time I went around here, I didn't give myself a good lineup, and I think I wasn't as clean as I could have been down at the bottom. So I'm trying to remedy that and have a clearer run here. This is just not cooperating. So another thing I just noticed, because I went in and got my width set for the plow here, it's definitely functions differently here than it did in FSN. When I auto set my width, it seems to remember what I did before, which is really nice, because I don't have to then readjust that extra width as I was, you know, as I would normally have had to in FSN, or frankly, I think even in single player. I don't know that I've seen this behavior. I knew it was going to do that. I've got everything lined up properly, but swinging around that curve didn't quite go the way I wanted, so I'm going to try to gently come back here. There is a way to back these plows up. It's just kind of once they start to go, they go. So it gets kind of ugly fast, but this should work, and then I can catch that little bit. Because again, if you recall back to my early days working with Limerick here, you know, part of the guidance was, hey, I'm willing to maybe pay a little bit more, but you need to do it at least as well as I would do it myself. Don't leave things laying around, this and that and whatever. So I'm just trying to be a diligent worker in that regard and do things the right way, and so that means cleaning up those little messes there that don't work out if I can't get a nice smooth line around. But being able to go around without having to reset that extra fractions of a meter, but to take advantage of the fact that the GPS does things and allows for a little bit of wiggle room, and therefore slightly less travel across the field, is always a helpful thing. So, love to see that. Another pro in the Farmers Only Club column of things that I like that I'm seeing here that are really, really helpful. So staying on that line of just things that I'm seeing that's different, as I mentioned, this is the point. I've already had videos starting to come out. It looks like there's several Farmers Only folks that have watched them. One of them looks like it's one of the leaders and founders of the community. They thanked me for the video and the honest review, and we got to chat a little bit later. I think he was then watching the second episode because he was making comments at various points about things I think I talked about in there. Again, it's always hard to remember when you've done something 2-3 weeks ago, and you know, I know what I talked about overall, but I can't say I know for certain, you know, everything that happened. So it does look like the planter was moved, because it was further kind of south in that grass area, so it wasn't moved a lot. But I don't know if maybe they went ahead and planted oilseed on some of these cotton fields already, and they're kind of just keeping up with my plowing and doing that, because I think you can throw oilseed in the ground at any point in time. I think that's a year-round cover crop that you can do. But they volunteered kind of information about what I covered in the first video about the home screen and just the number of folks and the number of, I think, registered users is what it was called, and then people online. So I'm going to share with that the clarity I got, so at least I know I'm not speculating, which is what I had to do in FSN, because whenever I asked the question, it was, well, don't worry about how we get that number, and so forth. And so it was nice to get information that might be helpful to some people who might be curious, because obviously I did talk about it, and more importantly, you kind of have it just provided as opposed to even having to ask for it. So the registered users is similar to what I would speculate was happening in FSN as well, which is those are the number of people that have applied at any given time to be in Farmers Only. So I think that was like at 1,295 or 96 or something, the first video. I haven't looked recently to see how any of that has changed. Alright, so at this point I am just going to start cutting across and start doing things, because I don't need a second pass unless something goes a different way. So I'm just going to start working across here, and that will allow me to get as much done as I can, because this is clearly the most efficient way. I've explained working time multiple times on this channel. I will do it multiple times again, because I think it's a crucial point if you start playing Farming Simulator to understand that the cool thing, for me at least, I find, is trying to find really realistic sims, or something that walks that line well between reality and playability. Because certainly there are things like, if we simulated everything, you're just then doing the job for real in a virtual manner, and obviously not actually getting paid for it. So that could get kind of tedious if suddenly you had to fill out all the paperwork and do whatever. But I've explained before, like, you can use real-time work time calculators that farmers use, and you can find them on the internet. You know, I've got one that I've used, tweaked, put it in a spreadsheet I use for Farming Simulator. But what I typically use it for is if I'm buying equipment for my own farm and I want to compare, hey, if I buy this plow versus this plow, and one has a speed and a width that it has, you know, you might find sometimes counterintuitively that the work time might be faster with a smaller implement that moves faster. And so you have to make more passes, but ultimately you find it takes you less time, and in that case it probably costs less money. Because that's the other piece I'll look at, and I've talked about several times, is that a lot of times the medium-sized equipment and again, we're talking about kind of the way the Farming Simulator prices are, kind of in the in-game equipment when you're looking at things, because obviously the modder might not keep their pricing in line with what Giants did. We've talked about Farmers Only Club making changes to mods I'm sure that includes changes to pricing and certainly even potentially speed and so forth. We've talked about, for example, that the plows require more power here in Farmers Only than they do straight out of the game. So they've taken things and modified them. So this plow that needs, I think it was 680 horsepower, doesn't require that much the way it's normally designed. So if you play it other ways outside of this community and you don't have access to the mods in Farmers Only Club and aren't using those, you would then find you could probably pull it with a lower cost tractor. But you kind of put all those things together to determine what makes sense to buy, and that's what I would use it for. But just in general, because those calculators work, that helps me size a farm and say, hey, if I want to spend no more than 2 hours plowing fields, for example, like I could determine I'm willing to invest in such and such equipment, what can I cover in 2 hours? Like it lets me step into answers from various angles. But the most important thing with work time is this is what counts as work time. The plow is in the ground and I am actively moving. So when I tell it I have a 10-acre field and I can go, in this case, 18.5 meters is the width of this, and we're doing it at 12 kilometers an hour, it would tell me how long that's going to take, but the time it's giving me is literal plow in the ground going. Right now, where I'm going to get to the end here and have to turn around, that's additional time. Like, there's no way you can model in a spreadsheet like how long it's going to take me to turn around or so forth. Again, I could probably put in some, after monitoring it and saying, hey, you know, the work time on this, my 10-acre field was this, and I would probably want a sample size larger than a couple. But let's say, you know, I owned a farm, I was a farm manager, and I owned the farm, and I plowed that field 5 times, 10 times would probably be better. And I basically tracked every time it took me this long. I could then figure out the difference between the work time with the implement and the actual time it took me in total, and that of course means that in those 5 or 10 times, I have to have not stopped. I have to be very accurate in what I'm recording, or my results are going to be skewed accordingly. I could then say, you know, let's say the work time said it was going to take an hour, but I consistently found that I was taking somewhere around an hour and a half. Well, I would know for a plow on my fields, you know, I probably need to add in 50% additional time to my work time to go ahead and do that. And that's the part that I don't know, because I've never modeled anything to that level, because frankly it would be very difficult to do, as we're talking about here. I'm in here for a period of time. You know, I've got a few more minutes that I can keep going here, but then I'm going to stop. I mean, I in theory I could, you know, write that all down, but then I introduce small anomalies that are going to affect that overall time. When I come back in, I have to reset my GPS. If I just did it all in one go, I wouldn't have to do that. And in the end, if everything goes well and I don't have any lag and I don't do whatever, like resetting the GPS, if I leave the plow, say stop now, and then come back, which is what I normally try to do, is, hey, I know I'm going straight. I know I was on the line for a while, so everything's aligned. So as long as I don't touch any steering when I come back in, I should be able to set my line exactly where I was before by just letting it run 15 meters and go. And so it should just take a few seconds. But sometimes it takes more time than that. Sometimes there's a problem. Sometimes, you know, I have to adjust something, and it just introduces glitches in the data, for lack of a better term. But the other piece that I don't know is, okay, I may need to add 50% for plowing, but I might only need to add 25% for harvesting, or I may need to add 100% for harvesting. So all the work time calculation really gives me is a apples to apples comparison of, if I use this tool, how long is it going to take me compared to another tool, or just give me the information to know this is as fast as I'm going to be able to do it, knowing that the work time is 100% working. And unless I'm simply doing work on something that is a straight line from beginning to end and is one working with wide, that I'm always going to have more time because I'm going to have to turn around. I'm going to have to do other things. Then at least I know if, hey, it's going to take an hour. If I have half an hour, I know I can't come in and finish the job. There's no physical way to do that. And that's the value of the work time and the accuracy that Farming Simulator has. So Giants has done a terrific job, a spot-on job of doing that, because I've found the time very, very accurate when I have run kind of controlled tests on things early on when I was trying to determine, can I rely on a normal work time calculator? Will it work in-game for me? And it does. And so I've been doing that for literal real-life years, so, which turns into decades and decades in Farming Simulator time, and had the benefit of that information. Alright, but like this again, and a lot of times, there's times I've edited videos where I just don't talk while I'm turning around, and I cut all the turnarounds off. So I have a pretty good understanding sometimes what it takes, but what I discovered in a good example would be, again, going back to generational farming, where I did the same job over and over and over for a couple decades in the time I was on there in game time. It was between 15 and 30 seconds to turn the mower around on each end of the field. And so, again, you can then look at a field, hey, I've got 40 rows. That means I'm adding 20 minutes to my work time in that field, just in turnaround time. And so on top of whatever the work time would be to actually cover the field, you have that information that time that you have to add in as well. So that all stems kind of from the conversation of just them being upfront about information, but it was like kind of a tangent that I went on. But finishing up that part, the other piece that they offered on the data on the front page, so registered users are basically people that have applied, and I what they didn't say specifically, but I think it's implied, is those are the amount of people that have applied and been accepted because they're registered. And so, and that's over the life of the community, which means we really don't know how many people are actively here and so forth. And similarly, that number that does fluctuate, the online users, they were up front and letting me know in full transparency, that's the number of people on the Discord at that time. That's the only thing they can really get data for. It doesn't show who's in the servers and things like that. So it's who's kind of online on the Discord, which means kind of like me, where I leave the Discord up. Like, I would always be counted as someone who was online, even though I'm not in-game. So it wasn't showing me exactly what I thought, but the segue, or the tie-in to the work time that I talked about, is as long as you understand what it's telling you, you can then still make decisions on it. So even though work time will never give me accurately how much time I'm going to need to complete all the work. So let's say the work time on this tells me 2.5 hours to plow the acreage on these 3 fields. I know it's going to be more than that, but I couldn't really accurately say, do I need 4 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours? I just know I need something more than 2.5. So similarly, if I know that the number of online people is 196 or whatever it was, again in the video that kind of had them share this information with me, versus the night before I had seen it was like 210 or 220. It simply tells me there's 20 or 30 more people doing something that evening, the evening before, than there were in the morning, so I at least understand there's probably less activity to some level here. I just can't specifically quantify what that is. So 30 or 40 people not being in Discord is going to mean something to the activity on the servers and so forth. And yes, I can't definitively say what that is, so one can argue, well, okay, then it's a useless piece of data. I would argue and say, no, it's not entirely useless. It may not be as useful as if they could find some way to tell me how many people are logged in and doing something on the servers. But when you get down to it, there's people that will log in and then step away for a couple hours because of something unexpected, for example, but stay logged in. Or, like we talked about when I had that information on Schwag's farm, where they're logged in over midnight because they then are able to get the animals to produce on both ends, and therefore then they get some better production and so forth. Those are things that are available to everyone, so I would view that as not a problem, because it's not anything that's called out as, hey, don't do this because it's going to cause the servers to crash or whatever. But my point being, like when I got in that day and Schwag's avatar was standing there near the silo, and I was like, hey, and I'm chatting to them in game and they're not responding, like they would, even if we were able to monitor, like they would have counted as someone that was on the server, but they weren't actually on and doing something. So it's just a different flavor of the same thing. So to me, I can square that in my mind. Like, no data is perfect, but if I know what the data represents and I'm accurately and I'm not speculating on it, I've been told what it is, which is what I got here, then I can use that to make decisions, perhaps. So, and that's exactly what I would do in that case. Now that I know that, I can't say, oh, there's 200 people in the servers. That's not what it's telling me. Now I know that. That's just telling me there's 200 people in Discord, but not all those people are necessarily sitting at their computers staring at Discord and reading it. Again, I'm in Discord now. It would tell people I'm that, but I'm here in Farming Simulator farming. I'm not doing anything. And even when I'm not in Farming Simulator farming, because I'm in Discord just when my machine is running, which is constantly, unless I have a power outage, I always show up as there. But it still gives me that baseline where if there's, say that maybe there's 196 of us that do that. That's why the users online, I'll never see it go below 196. And so then I know, hey, there's 30 more people. That means there's probably 30 people doing something. And since there isn't anything to do in this community, I mean, sure, you can chat in Discord for a while, but it's unlikely that people are regularly coming here doing nothing but chatting on Discord. They're likely, if they're joining up on Discord, they're doing something. They're issuing bot commands. They're doing whatever. Something is probably happening. So at a bare minimum, I can take those data points and say there were likely 30 people either farming that night before, or maybe going in, moving money around, moving crops around, moving equipment around, using the Discord automation that's available in the community. And there was activity happening in some way, shape, or form. So I get that exposure, and now I understand it more. And that was really the only type of thing I was looking for, and I think I certainly had a feeling with the tone and the response I was met whenever I asked a question, of almost suspicion of, like, it was never flat out said, why are you asking that? But it very much felt like that was what was happening, is that there was this paranoia that somehow, if I knew the truth and I knew what that was, that somehow I would use it for nefarious purposes. And that's a whole different psychological discussion of, like, what if you're that way as a human, like, what does that say about your comfort in the world and your feeling of safety and this, that, or whatever, and I've got my opinion, and as you well know, I'm going to share it with you now. But to me, someone who's secure in what they're doing, what it telegraphed to me by this admin reaching out to me and then just voluntarily sharing that was, they've got nothing to hide. They're not concerned that somehow this is going to be misused in some way to cause them harm, where I think that was the feeling to some degree, is what I felt in the other community. And to me, that made no sense. Like, especially given the fact that, in my view, I was going out of my way to try to explain to them, like, I love what's happening here. I think this is wonderful. I think this is a very unique space. I'm just trying to understand it better so that I can either enjoy it better, tell people about it better. Once again, to me, the little bit of conversation I had, like, I'll just be open about kind of where my headspace is with what happened. They were very open, like, hey, if you have any questions, let me know. If you have whatever. It wasn't, hey, I'm too busy, don't ping me unless I ping you. And again, I get it's a very different environment. I get in the community I came from, the individual who had all the answers was doing all the coding work and so forth. And so if they spent time chatting with all of us, they weren't coding. And since they're coding and the coding lets them do this as a job and lets them get paid through donations and run their life because they have an income, I get the draw of, I can't only code for 2 hours and then chat with folks for 6 in a typical 8-hour workday, because then I'm not going to have enough coming out to keep this ball rolling, and then I'm going to have to go and get a more traditional job again. And I'd rather not do that. I'd rather keep doing this. So I understand the dynamic difference. We're here partially because things are automated or so forth. It was, definitely much more of a, hey, I can chat with you and so forth. But the openness of, hey, if you need anything or you have questions over time, I felt that was a door being open to, just the way the whole thing started. I mean, the message and the only conversation I've had with this person began with, thank you for the video and the honest review of FOC. That's how it started. I didn't solicit them. I didn't ask them for comment. They reached out to me, let me know. There's no forum here in FOC like there was kind of a share your streams, share your images from Farming Simulator. There was a channel in the Discord in FSN. There isn't anything like that here. And in the notes they had indicated, like, they're not looking for people to be advertising whatever. So versus an FSN, where in that one channel I would post every video I put up so that people knew it was there, there's no format for me to do that here, which is fine. Again, I'm not all about self-advertising and so forth in channels that aren't there, so I'm not going to pressure them like, hey, do this. People can find it other ways. I've got the Farming Simulator Discord I can do it on. I've got a couple other YouTuber Discord channels that are, large channels that allow for other people outside that channel to post things. And so I've got 4 or 5 places, aside from my own Discord and so forth, that I post video announcements on. But this person found out about the episode somehow. Again, I've certainly talked with enough people in the community here that I understand it. It's not like, oh my god, I don't know how it happened. I wonder, like, they must be clairvoyant and brilliant. No, I mean, I assume someone told them. And again, I had shared in one of the episodes. At one point, like, I was on with a bunch of admins. This person was not in that group, but the simplest path, Occam's razor, don't make things too difficult. The simplest path is those admins simply let him know, hey, we were on with this guy. He's, recording. He said he was the one that did whatever, and they shared their opinion of, I'm sure, of, again, I'm projecting what I would do onto them, but, there likely were some observations of, they liked what they heard from me. They thought I was a lunatic, whatever it was. That's probably how they heard about it, and and knew about it. And obviously I had that thing posted as a premiere on the channel for the better part of a week and a half or something. So it was out there as well. But to me, there's a possibility here that they may have been opening the door to a little bit of, hey, we understand you're doing something that has a possible benefit to the community, and if there's any way I can help you do that for the betterment of the community, let me know, type of thing. So to me, I felt like there's an openness, like if I need something, and I don't anticipate that I need anything. I'm just sharing how things are working here. I mean, certainly, some of the inner workings of the finances or the models, or how they came up with, why is a tailor shop $2.6 million, for example? Like, what did they do? Did they just pick a number out of thin air? Did they do whatever? At the end of the day, to me, that's a lot of noise. Like, if I was a data OCD person, I don't know what else to describe it as, but like, for me to use the data, I don't need to know what the assumptions of how the point was created to do it. Certainly, it's an easier path to a solution if I know, if they're simply like, hey, tier 3, because I know they've been described as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 productions. And so basically the tier 1 productions are, I think, like a dairy, or a bakery is probably another good example. Like some of the, and I think just some of the items in those things, because if I need another production item to make something in that production, like, that's not tier 1. But where if it's like I can just take raw material from the game, so for example, a dairy, milk turns into butter, milk turns into cheese, that's a tier 1 thing. But if I need the butter, say, to make a cake, now I'm in the bakery, a tier 2 thing. But a bakery also has, well, no, a bakery has bread which needs flour, and flour comes from a grain mill. So a bakery is a bad example. That's probably a tier 2 situation. Where, once again, like, the tailor shop is at the far end. It's the 2.6 million. The thing I did notice, and I haven't spent time, like, truly learning or researching it, where I would say I sat down and looked and said whatever, but I could very quickly see productions that were in the same tier still had a slight variation in pricing. However, in Farming Simulator, I would have things that also did that. They'd be 60 or 70,000 or maybe 100,000 or whatever. There'd still be variations in pricing of different things. And so it could just be, they were all high end. And what I had noticed is, I think some were like 2.4, 2.5 million, and some were 2.6, 2.7 million. So I saw that at the large numbers. I didn't really at all look at anything other than that, because I had been given that information as people were talking to me about the bigger challenge of the economy here. And, this is the example that productions were changed. And so I kind of went in, and, like, the thing I can't tell directly, easily, is, were the outputs modified? I'm assuming they are. And at some point, I'm sure I'll look at that. Whether it's when I'm in FN, or one of these days, if I ever have, like, nothing to do, maybe I'll start to do that. But to me, that type of collaboration potentially opens up just the door to a lot of fun possibilities, because to me, a possible benefit from them, you have an enthusiastic supporter who happens to put YouTube videos together that are going to get seen by some segment of the audience that could draw more people in. But if I know I've got stuff going on, and if nothing else, if it just creates more intrigue for me, like I already was starting to think about this morning, like, I know I've got people asking me, and some of the people offline that are telling me and are a little disappointed by my view that I may just stay a farmhand. I may never become a farm manager, and I've been telling them I don't know that it has as much of an impact as you think it does. I may still be able to give you enough information about Farmers Only Club without ever becoming a farm manager. Because again, I'm pretty good at what I do. I'm pretty good at figuring out processes. I'm pretty good at figuring out how something works and reverse engineering what I think I'm seeing. And again, that's what I provide on the channel. Like, this is what I think is happening. Because I'm not the developer, because I'm not looking at the code, I can't guarantee you that it's going to be happening, that it's happening that way. But this is the behavior I see, and I can show you and explain to you what I did to test it to do that. So to some degree, it's a little bit of the scientific method applied to Farming Simulator. Like, I'm going to give you the experiment I did, and I'm going to explain to you the conditions, I'm going to explain to you the variables that I'm aware of, and you can go ahead and try to recreate that experiment and those results on your own, and if you get the same results, then hey, likely it's been peer verified that someone else did the same thing. When I was working through precision farming when it came out, and I did, the only video you're ever going to need about precision farming, which I've gotten wonderful feedback on from all kinds of people, that they felt, yes, this was by far the best coverage that they've come across. Again, I spent a ton of time on that, and I was very open, and I had several people come back to me and say, yep, I thought you were a little crazy, and I tried it, and I got the same results, so yeah, I guess you were right. I didn't think it worked that way. The crop sensors I talked about a few episodes back were one of those. Similarly within generational farming, when I was insistent that grass, hands down, 10 times more profitable than you can possibly be with crops in the same acreage, and I had people who had been playing Farming Simulator forever who were running giant operations in that community pinging me saying I was nuts. And I had a couple of them be like, I'm going to go try this on my own, and I'm going to explain to you how it works. But we were up front when we talked. I'm like, I assume if I don't hear from you, then you haven't been able to disprove what I said. And I never heard from any of them. So maybe they lost interest and they didn't do anything. But knowing some of the folks I'm talking about, I'm pretty sure they went ahead and tried it and realized, this guy's right. Like, he did it right. He knows what he's doing, and this is how it works. And they learned something because they thought they had it figured out. And that's why I'm always humble and open to show me that I'm wrong. Show me that, I'm full of it. And let me do the same thing. Tell me, well, no, you didn't do this. Go and try this, this, and this. And then once again, it may be something I don't have enough interest in, and I say, well, all right, that's fine. Maybe I'll try it your way because you think it's working that way, and I just don't have enough time or interest to go fully test it and spend the 20 hours you did, which is similar to, I think, what people ran in with precision farming for me in some cases. I think I shared I spent 12 hours doing the work to gather the data I needed for just one data point in that series. The rest of it was pretty straightforward, so I don't want it to seem like I invested hundreds of hours into creating this, but there were a couple dozen hours probably at least that went into recording, editing, putting everything together to get that together. That's a lot of investment of time to do certain things, but there are a lot of people here asking, not here, but here in the world that are pinging me that I know mainly still that are living in FSN, like, hey, I'm interested, I'm curious, but what about this, what about this, what about that they're focused on. Well, if you would become farm manager, you could, put that insightful gathering into it, and then they've come to trust me on that type of thing, and they want to know. But I'm like, I think I can do it without being farm manager, and I may find I can't, and if I can't, then I'll make a decision, if I'm still choosing not to be farm manager, to say, you know what, this is important enough, and I'll just become farm manager to understand this. But the cool thing here is I have an opening, perhaps, like if I run into something like that, I could just ask this person that reached out to me here in FOC and say, hey, I'm speculating about this, and I have confidence they could go ask the people if they don't know the answer, and that they would get me something back. And that was just not what I was getting where I came from. But what that turns into is I was already like, wow, if they're really willing to be this open about stuff, maybe it would be worthwhile over time when I have some downtime to say, all right, here's this one thing I learned about FOC that was really interesting. Let me, in essence, create a tutorial about that. Like, hey, if you're in FOC or you're thinking about FOC, this is how this feature works. This is how this works. This is how you do this. Like as simple as in the first video. How do you do a player contract? What happens? It'd be a 2-3 minute video, because again, I don't try to overcomplicate things when I'm explaining things and I'm coaching people or teaching people how something works. I would make it very clear. You go to the Discord channel, you find a contract you like, you hit claim contract. It's going to put your name in. Go to the server, do the work, come back, hit complete contract. You're going to see how much time it is. Wait for the farmer to pay you. Provide them with any information they need, like, hey, I had to step away for an hour, so even though it said I was in for 3, pay me for 2. Wait for the money to get paid, check in your dashboard that you got paid, done. That would be the content of the video. But those are still tutorials. That's how people learn. Like when they're looking for something, you just give them little snippets of things. And so all of this is to say, like, it's got me enthused to potentially be like, I'm willing to put in a few hours to do something like that, to help the community out and attract more people and do more stuff, because I'm enthused about it. And that was, again, just like whether you leave a job, you leave whatever, that's when I know, like, hey, I'm not feeling that. Like, maybe I need to go, maybe I'm just not fitting here anymore. And that's why I left. And like I said, I've had people ask, now that I've been here 2 or 3 weeks, the people that are on the fence and debating, maybe giving this a try, because they've had some of the same frustrations that I've had over in FSN. Hey, you still enjoying it? And I've been very upfront with them. Like, yeah, it's been better to some degree every day. I get it's still new. It's not even been a month. I'm still in that honeymoon period, if what people would say. But I can assure you, in that same time frame, I had already discovered things, and it was things, it was plural, that were already rankling me a little bit. And that hasn't happened here, so to me it's a very different experience, and therefore it's very exciting. So at this point I need to step away, but I think I've also given you more than enough to keep going here, so I'm going to wrap this as an episode as well. But I'm going to be back here probably doing some more work later, but you know what plowing a field looks like, and unless I've got something else to tell you, probably not going to be in another episode yet, so I will see you next time.